Sometimes the most extraordinary moments come disguised as ordinary tasks. Picture this. A young woman walks into a military command center, coffee pot in hand, expecting nothing more than to refill cups and fade into the background. She's been assigned the most basic duty possible, coffee service, because that's what they thought she was good for. But what happened next would shake the foundations of military hierarchy and prove that brilliance can emerge from the most unexpected places. What started as a simple coffee run turned into a moment that would echo through military history, challenging assumptions about capability, gender, and the power of speaking truth to authority. This is the story of how one woman's courage to correct a colonel's critical error not only saved lives, but changed the course of her entire career, and showed the world that sometimes the person pouring coffee knows more about winning wars than the person giving orders. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood outside the imposing doors of the Strategic Operations Center at Fort Braxton, her freshly pressed uniform crisp in the early morning air. The brass nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and she could hear the low murmur of voices from within. After 18 months of rigorous training at the Military Intelligence Academy, where she had graduated at the top of her class in cartography and strategic analysis, this was supposed to be her moment. This was where her expertise in geographic intelligence and battlefield mapping would finally be put to use in support of active military operations overseas. She had spent countless hours studying topographical maps, learning to read terrain like others read novels, understanding how elevation changes could determine the success or failure of military movements. Her professors had praised her natural ability to spot inconsistencies in mapping data, her keen eye for detail that could identify potential ambush sites or strategic advantages that others might miss. During training exercises, she had consistently outperformed her peers, earning recognition for her innovative approaches to intelligence gathering and analysis. But as she walked through those doors that morning, her commanding officer, Major Harrison, barely looked up from his paperwork. His desk was cluttered with mission reports and strategic documents, the kind of materials she had trained extensively to analyze. Without ceremony or explanation, he handed her a simple assignment sheet that would change the trajectory of her military career in ways she could never have imagined. Coffee duty, morning briefings, refreshment service for senior staff meetings. Sarah stared at the paper in disbelief, reading the words multiple times as if they might somehow rearrange themselves into something more substantial. This was not what she had envisioned when she raised her right hand and took the oath of service. This was not why she had spent months learning advanced mapping techniques, studying intelligence protocols, or mastering the complex art of battlefield analysis. The assignment felt like a slap in the face, a deliberate dismissal of everything she had worked so hard to achieve. Major Harrison finally glanced up, his expression neutral, but his tone dismissive. He explained that the Strategic Operations Center had specific protocols for new personnel, regardless of their training background or academic achievements. Everyone started with basic support duties before being considered for more advanced responsibilities. It was standard procedure, he insisted, though Sarah noticed that her male colleagues who had arrived at the base around the same time had been immediately assigned to analytical positions that matched their training. The reality of her situation began to sink in as she was led through the command center for the first time. This was the nerve center of military operations for the entire region, where critical decisions were made that affected thousands of soldiers in the field. The walls were lined with massive displays showing real-time intelligence feeds, satellite imagery, and detailed topographical maps of active conflict zones. Officers moved with purpose between workstations equipped with the latest analysis software and communication equipment. This was exactly where she belonged, where her skills could make a real difference in supporting military operations and potentially saving lives. Instead, she found herself in a small supply room adjacent to the main briefing hall, being shown how to operate an industrial coffee machine and learning the preferences of senior staff members. Colonel Richard Blackwood, the commanding officer of the Strategic Operations Center, preferred his coffee black with exactly 2 sugars. Major General Patricia Wells liked her tea with honey and lemon. Captain Rodriguez needed decaffeinated coffee due to a medical condition, while Commander Thompson always requested extra cream. Sarah learned these details with a growing sense of frustration and disappointment. She had not joined the military to memorize beverage preferences or to fade into the background during important meetings. Her training had prepared her to be an active participant in intelligence operations, not a silent service provider whose primary responsibility was ensuring that senior officers remained caffeinated during their decision-making processes. The first few days passed in a blur of mundane tasks and suppressed ambition. Each morning, she would arrive early to prepare the coffee service for the daily intelligence briefings. She would arrange cups and saucers on silver trays, ensure that sugar and cream were properly stocked, and stand quietly in the corner while senior officers discussed operational matters that she was more than qualified to analyze and contribute to meaningfully. During these briefings, Sarah found herself listening intently to discussions about troop movements, supply line vulnerabilities, and terrain challenges in active combat zones. Her training had given her deep expertise in exactly these areas, and she often found herself mentally analyzing the information being presented, identifying potential issues or alternative approaches that might not have been considered. But her role was to remain silent and invisible, to serve refreshments and retreat to the background while others made the critical decisions that would shape military operations. The irony was not lost on her that she was often the most qualified person in the room to analyze the geographical and topographical elements of military planning. Yet she was expected to contribute nothing more than ensuring that everyone had adequate caffeine to fuel their discussions. She watched as officers sometimes struggled with map interpretations or geographic considerations that seemed obvious to her trained eye, but protocol demanded that she remain silent and observe without participating. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to notice patterns in the briefings and discussions that others seemed to miss. Her background in cartography and intelligence analysis had taught her to look beyond surface-level information, to identify connections and potential issues that might not be immediately apparent to those focused on broader strategic concerns. She began to suspect that some of the maps and intelligence reports being used in briefings contained inaccuracies or outdated information that could potentially compromise mission effectiveness. But challenging senior officers was not part of her job description, and she had been explicitly instructed to maintain a low profile while performing her support duties. The military hierarchy was clear and unforgiving, and overstepping boundaries as a junior officer could have serious consequences for her career prospects and future assignments. She found herself caught between her professional training, which had taught her to speak up when she identified potential problems, and military protocol, which demanded absolute respect for chain of command. The Strategic Operations Center operated on a schedule that seemed designed to maximize both efficiency and stress. Morning briefings began at precisely 7 o'clock, followed by ongoing analysis sessions that could stretch well into the evening hours. Sarah found herself working long days, arriving before dawn to prepare for the morning sessions, and often staying late to clean up after extended evening meetings. The work was physically demanding in its own way, requiring constant attention to detail and the ability to anticipate the needs of senior staff without being asked. Despite the monotonous nature of her assigned duties, Sarah remained professional and dedicated to performing her responsibilities at the highest possible level. She took pride in ensuring that every aspect of the refreshment service was executed flawlessly, from the temperature of the coffee to the precise arrangement of materials on serving trays. Her attention to detail, which had served her so well during intelligence training, now manifested itself in the meticulous execution of tasks that felt far beneath her capabilities and training level. But even as she performed these mundane duties with military precision, Sarah never stopped listening and learning. Every briefing was an opportunity to expand her understanding of current operations, to observe how senior officers approached complex strategic problems, and to identify areas where her analytical skills might eventually prove valuable if given the chance. She began to understand the personalities and decision-making styles of key personnel, knowledge that would prove invaluable when her moment finally arrived to step beyond the coffee service role. The other personnel in the Strategic Operations Center seemed to view her as part of the furniture, a necessary but unremarkable presence whose primary value was ensuring their comfort during long meetings. Most barely acknowledged her presence, speaking freely about sensitive operational matters as if she were not there. This invisibility, while personally frustrating, provided her with access to information and insights that she might not have gained in a more formal analytical role where discussions might be more guarded. As her first month at the Strategic Operations Center drew to a close, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. She could accept her assigned role and hope that eventually, through patience and persistence, she might be given opportunities to contribute more meaningfully to military operations. Alternatively, she could find ways to demonstrate her capabilities and expertise, even at the risk of overstepping traditional boundaries and potentially facing disciplinary action for exceeding her authorized responsibilities. The decision would soon be made for her in ways she could never have anticipated, when a critical error in intelligence reporting would create a moment of crisis that demanded immediate action regardless of protocol or hierarchy. The coffee duty that had seemed like such a disappointment would position her at exactly the right place and time to make a difference that would resonate throughout her military career and beyond. The morning of October 15th started like any other in the Strategic Operations Center, but Sarah could sense an unusual tension in the air as she prepared for the daily intelligence briefing. The coffee machine hummed its familiar tune as she went through her practiced routine, but the conversations she could overhear from the main briefing room carried an edge of urgency that had been building over the past several days. Intelligence reports had been flowing in about increased enemy activity in a mountainous region designated as Sector 7, and senior command was under pressure to develop an effective response strategy. Colonel Blackwood had arrived earlier than usual, his usually immaculate uniform showing signs of a sleepless night spent reviewing operational plans and intelligence assessments. Sarah noticed the way he moved with sharp, decisive gestures, a clear indication that whatever was being planned would have significant implications for troops already deployed in the field. The weight of command was visible in his posture and expression, and she found herself wondering what critical decisions would be made during the morning briefing. As she wheeled the refreshment cart into the main briefing room, Sarah observed the assembled group of senior officers with their usual mixture of professional respect and personal frustration. Major General Wells sat at the head of the conference table, her steel gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her eyes focused intently on the stack of intelligence reports spread before her. Captain Rodriguez was hunched over his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as he compiled the latest battlefield assessments from multiple field units operating in the region. Commander Thompson stood near the large wall-mounted display screen, holding a laser pointer and preparing to present the latest intelligence findings to the group. The screen showed a detailed topographical map of Sector 7, complete with elevation markers, road networks, and identified enemy positions based on recent reconnaissance activities. Sarah had seen similar maps countless times during her training, and something about this particular display immediately caught her attention, though she could not initially identify exactly what seemed wrong. Colonel Blackwood called the meeting to order with his usual authoritative manner, and the room fell silent as Commander Thompson began his presentation. The intelligence officer spoke with confidence about enemy troop concentrations, supply routes, and strategic positions that had been identified through satellite imagery and field reconnaissance reports. His analysis suggested that a coordinated assault on enemy positions could be highly effective if properly planned and executed with adequate support resources. As Thompson continued his briefing, highlighting specific geographical features and tactical considerations, Sarah found herself unconsciously analyzing the information being presented through the lens of her cartographic training. Her mind automatically processed elevation data, assessed terrain challenges, and evaluated the tactical implications of the geographical elements being discussed. What she saw on the display screen began to trigger warning signals in her analytical mind, subtle inconsistencies that suggested serious problems with the intelligence assessment. The more she studied the map while performing her serving duties, the more convinced she became that there were significant errors in the geographical data being presented to senior command. The elevation markers seemed inconsistent with the terrain features shown in the satellite imagery. The road network appeared to include routes that would be impossible given the topographical challenges of the region. Most critically, the identified enemy positions were plotted in locations that would be strategically disadvantageous and logistically impossible to maintain, suggesting that the intelligence analysis had fundamentally misinterpreted the geographical realities of the operational area. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized the potential implications of these mapping errors. If senior command approved a military operation based on inaccurate geographical intelligence, troops could find themselves walking into impossible terrain or advancing toward positions that did not actually exist. Supply lines could be planned for routes that were impassable, leaving soldiers without adequate resources in hostile territory. The margin for error in military operations was razor thin, and geographical mistakes could easily result in mission failure and unnecessary casualties. But challenging the intelligence assessment being presented by a senior officer was far beyond her authorized responsibilities as a coffee service provider. Speaking up would be a violation of military protocol and chain of command that could result in immediate disciplinary action and potentially end her military career before it had truly begun. She found herself faced with an impossible choice between following orders and potentially preventing a military disaster that could cost lives and compromise mission objectives. Commander Thompson concluded his presentation by recommending immediate approval of a coordinated assault plan that would deploy 3 battalions of infantry, supported by armored units and helicopter gunships. The operation would begin at dawn the following day, taking advantage of weather conditions that would provide optimal visibility for air support operations. Major General Wells nodded approvingly and began polling the other senior officers for their assessment of the proposed plan and their recommendations for final approval. As the discussion continued around the conference table, Sarah found herself moving mechanically through her service duties while her mind raced with the implications of what she had observed. Every instinct developed during her intelligence training was screaming that the geographical analysis was fundamentally flawed, but protocol demanded that she remain silent and invisible. The coffee cups clinked softly as she arranged them on the serving tray, a mundane sound that seemed absurdly normal given the magnitude of the potential crisis unfolding in the room. Captain Rodriguez expressed some concerns about the timeline for the operation, suggesting that additional reconnaissance might be beneficial before committing substantial resources to the assault. But his objections were focused on intelligence gathering rather than geographical analysis, and he seemed to accept the mapping data as accurate and reliable. Major General Wells acknowledged his concerns, but indicated that operational pressures required immediate action based on currently available intelligence assessments. The discussion turned to specific tactical elements of the proposed operation, including approach routes, communication protocols, and contingency plans for various scenarios that might develop during the mission. Sarah listened with growing horror as senior officers planned detailed military movements based on geographical data that she was increasingly certain contained critical errors that could compromise the entire operation and endanger the lives of hundreds of soldiers. Colonel Blackwood began reviewing the final operational timeline, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under pressure. The assault would commence at 0600 hours, with infantry units advancing along predetermined routes, while armored support maintained overwatch positions on elevated terrain. Helicopter gunships would provide close air support and reconnaissance capabilities, coordinating their movements with ground forces through established communication channels. As the meeting moved toward final approval of the operation, Sarah realized that this might be her only opportunity to prevent what could become a military catastrophe. Her training had prepared her to identify exactly these types of intelligence failures, and her expertise in cartography and geographical analysis gave her the knowledge needed to understand the specific problems with the mapping data being used for operational planning. The question was whether she had the courage to speak up and risk everything to challenge senior officers who were about to approve a potentially disastrous military operation. The room fell silent as Major General Wells prepared to give final approval for the assault plan. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat as she struggled with the decision that would define her military career and potentially affect the lives of hundreds of soldiers preparing to carry out orders based on flawed intelligence. Every second of hesitation increased the likelihood that the operation would be approved and set in motion, making it increasingly difficult to prevent what she feared could become a tragic military failure. In that moment of crisis, Sarah's training overcame her fear of protocol violations. Her professors at the Military Intelligence Academy had emphasized that the primary responsibility of any intelligence officer was to ensure the accuracy of information used for operational planning, regardless of personal consequences or political considerations. The lives of soldiers in the field depended on the integrity of intelligence analysis, and compromising that integrity for any reason was a betrayal of the most fundamental principles of military service. The coffee pot trembled slightly in her hands as she realized that everything she had trained for, everything she believed about her duty as a soldier and an intelligence professional, was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. The moment had arrived when she would have to choose between following orders and following her conscience, between maintaining her invisible status and stepping forward to challenge authority in defense of principles that transcended military hierarchy. What happened next would transform not only her own career but Also the way senior command viewed the capabilities and potential contributions of junior officers who might have critical expertise that could prevent military disasters and save lives in the field. That Sarah's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot with deliberate precision. The metallic clink against the serving tray echoing unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet briefing room. Major General Wells had just opened her mouth to give the final authorization for Operation Mountain Strike, the assault that Sarah was convinced would lead to catastrophic failure if executed based on the flawed intelligence currently being presented. Time seemed to slow as Sarah realized that the next few seconds would determine not only her military career, but potentially the fate of hundreds of soldiers who would soon receive orders to advance into what could become a deadly trap. "Excuse me, sir." The words escaped from her lips before her conscious mind had fully processed the decision to speak. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every head in the room turned toward her with expressions ranging from surprise to outright shock. In the rigid hierarchy of military briefings, junior officers simply did not interrupt senior command during operational planning sessions. The breach of protocol was so unprecedented that several officers seemed unable to process what had just occurred. Colonel Blackwood's face flushed red as he fixed his gaze on Sarah, his eyes narrowing with barely controlled anger at the interruption. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you are completely out of line. Return to your duties immediately and report to my office after this briefing for disciplinary action." His voice carried the full weight of military authority, but Sarah could see something else in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested even he was curious about what could possibly motivate such a dramatic breach of protocol. But Sarah had already crossed the point of no return, and she knew that her only chance of avoiding complete career destruction was to prove that her interruption was justified by information critical enough to override normal military procedures. Her voice steadied as she responded with as much professional composure as she could manage under the circumstances. "Sir, with respect, I believe there are critical errors in the geographical intelligence being used for this operation that could result in mission failure and unnecessary casualties." The silence that followed was deafening. Major General Wells leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable as she studied Sarah with the calculating gaze of someone weighing whether to allow this unprecedented situation to continue or to shut it down immediately with severe disciplinary consequences. Captain Rodriguez looked between Sarah and Colonel Blackwood with obvious discomfort, while Commander Thompson stood frozen at the presentation screen, his laser pointer still aimed at the map that Sarah was challenging. Major General Wells finally broke the silence with a question that carried both skepticism and a hint of curiosity. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you are assigned to refreshment services. What possible expertise could you have regarding intelligence analysis or geographical assessment?" Her tone was neutral but pointed, clearly designed to give Sarah one final opportunity to retreat gracefully before facing the full consequences of her actions. Sarah straightened her posture and spoke with the confidence that had carried her through the most challenging aspects of her military training. "Ma'am, I graduated at the top of my class from the Military Intelligence Academy with specialization in cartography and strategic geographical analysis. I have extensive training in topographical mapping, terrain assessment, and intelligence verification protocols. Based on that training, I believe the map currently being used for operational planning contains significant errors that could compromise mission effectiveness." The admission that she possessed advanced intelligence training seemed to catch several officers off guard. Colonel Blackwood's expression shifted from anger to confusion as he processed the disconnect between her current assignment and her apparent qualifications. Commander Thompson lowered his laser pointer and took a step closer to the table, his professional curiosity apparently overriding his concern about protocol violations. Major General Wells studied Sarah for several long moments before making a decision that would prove pivotal for everyone in the room. "Very well, Lieutenant. You have 30 seconds to explain your concerns. If your observations prove to be unfounded, you will face immediate disciplinary action for gross insubordination. If, however, your assessment has merit, we will evaluate the implications for current operational planning. Proceed." Sarah moved quickly to the wall-mounted display screen, her heart pounding as she prepared to either vindicate her decision or end her military career in spectacular fashion. She pointed to specific elements of the topographical map while explaining her analysis with the precision and clarity that had impressed her instructors during advanced training exercises. "Sir, the elevation markers shown here indicate a gradual slope toward the enemy positions, but the satellite imagery shows terrain features consistent with a steep ravine system that would make the indicated approach routes impassable for infantry advance. She continued her analysis, pointing to additional inconsistencies between the mapping data and the photographic evidence visible in the intelligence reports. The road network shown on the tactical overlay includes several routes that appear to cross geographical features that would make vehicle movement impossible. Additionally, the enemy positions are plotted in locations that would be strategically indefensible and logistically unsustainable, suggesting that either the intelligence is outdated or the geographical analysis has misinterpreted the terrain features. Commander Thompson stepped forward to examine the map more closely, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he followed Sarah's analysis. As the intelligence officer responsible for the briefing, he had relied on geographical assessments provided by other analysts and had not conducted the detailed terrain verification that Sarah's training had taught her to perform automatically. The implications of her observations were becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss or ignore. The tactical plan calls for armored support to maintain overwatch positions on elevated terrain, Sarah continued, her confidence building as she recognized that her analysis was being taken seriously. However, the elevation data suggests that these positions would actually be in low-lying areas that would provide no tactical advantage and could potentially expose our forces to enemy fire from higher ground that is not properly identified on this map. Major General Wells rose from her chair and approached the display screen, studying the details that Sarah had identified with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating military intelligence. Her expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see that the senior officer was processing the information with serious consideration rather than dismissing it as the ramblings of an insubordinate junior officer. Colonel Blackwood joined the group at the display screen, his earlier anger replaced by professional concern as he began to understand the potential implications of the mapping errors that Sarah had identified. If her analysis was correct, the operation that was moments away from receiving final approval could indeed result in military disaster, with troops advancing into impossible terrain while enemy forces maintained tactical advantages that had not been properly assessed or accounted for in the planning process. Captain Rodriguez pulled up additional satellite imagery on his laptop and began comparing the photographic evidence with the tactical overlays being used for operational planning. As he worked, his expression grew increasingly grim, confirming that the discrepancies Sarah had identified were not minor technical errors, but fundamental flaws in the geographical intelligence that formed the foundation of the entire operational plan. Lieutenant Mitchell, Major General Wells said finally, her voice carrying a mixture of respect and concern, your analysis appears to identify serious problems with our current intelligence assessment. Can you provide recommendations for correcting these errors and developing more reliable geographical intelligence for this operational area? Sarah felt a surge of relief and professional satisfaction as she realized that her decision to speak up had been vindicated, but she also understood that the real work was just beginning. Identifying problems was only the first step. Providing solutions would be essential for maintaining credibility and proving that her interruption had been motivated by genuine professional concerns rather than a desire to create dramatic disruption. Ma'am, I would recommend immediate verification of all elevation data through multiple independent sources, including ground-based reconnaissance if possible. The satellite imagery should be reanalyzed by cartography specialists to ensure proper interpretation of terrain features. Additionally, we should cross-reference enemy position intelligence with geographical realities to determine whether reported locations are actually tactically viable for sustained occupation. Commander Thompson nodded grimly as he processed Sarah's recommendations. General, implementing these verification protocols would require at least 48 hours of additional analysis time. The operation would need to be delayed pending completion of revised intelligence assessments. The implications were clear. Accepting Sarah's analysis would mean abandoning the current timeline and potentially missing tactical opportunities that might not arise again. But Major General Wells had not achieved her rank by avoiding difficult decisions, and she understood that military operations based on flawed intelligence were far more dangerous than delayed operations based on accurate information. Operation Mountain Strike is hereby postponed pending comprehensive review of all geographical and topographical intelligence. Commander Thompson, I want complete verification of mapping data within 36 hours. Captain Rodriguez, coordinate with field reconnaissance units to provide ground truth assessments of terrain features and enemy positions. As the senior officers began discussing the revised timeline and verification protocols, Sarah realized that her moment of courage had fundamentally altered not only her own status within the Strategic Operations Center, but also the trajectory of military operations that could affect hundreds of soldiers and potentially influence the broader strategic situation in the region. The coffee duty that had seemed like such a professional disappointment had positioned her to make a contribution that could save lives and prevent military failure on a significant scale. The next 36 hours became a whirlwind of intense activity as the Strategic Operations Center mobilized resources to verify Sarah's analysis and develop accurate geographical intelligence for the postponed operation. Major General Wells had assigned Sarah to work directly with Commander Thompson's intelligence team, effectively removing her from coffee duty and placing her in the analytical role she had trained for since joining the military. The transformation from invisible service provider to critical team member was so dramatic that Sarah sometimes felt as though she had stepped into an entirely different reality. Working alongside seasoned intelligence analysts, Sarah found herself diving deep into the complexities of geographical verification that went far beyond the theoretical exercises of her academy training. The team had access to multiple satellite systems, aerial reconnaissance data from unmanned drones, and communication intercepts from field units that provided real-time information about conditions in Sector 7. Her task was to coordinate all of these information sources into a comprehensive and accurate picture of the terrain that would support effective military planning. The first breakthrough came when Sarah identified the source of the original mapping errors that had triggered her dramatic intervention. The tactical overlays had been based on topographical data that was nearly 3 years old, predating significant geological changes that had occurred during recent seasonal flooding. A major landslide had altered the elevation profile of the target area, making several planned approach routes completely impassable while creating new tactical opportunities that had not been recognized in the outdated intelligence assessments. Commander Thompson worked closely with Sarah as they reconstructed the geographical realities of the operational area, and he quickly recognized that her analytical capabilities exceeded those of many senior analysts with years of field experience. Her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources and identify patterns that others had missed was exactly the kind of expertise that the intelligence community needed for complex operations in challenging terrain environments. Lieutenant Mitchell, Thompson said during one of their late-night analysis sessions, "Your cartographic training has given you skills that we desperately need for operations in mountainous regions. The geographical challenges in Sector 7 are representative of terrain conditions throughout this entire theater of operations. We need analysts who can read terrain like you do, who can spot the kinds of problems that could have led to disaster if not corrected." As Sarah continued her analysis, she discovered additional intelligence gaps that had not been apparent during her initial assessment. The enemy positions that had seemed strategically impossible were actually decoy installations designed to draw military attention away from real fortifications located in more defensible terrain features. The deception had been effective precisely because previous analysts had not conducted the detailed geographical verification that would have revealed the tactical implausibility of the reported enemy locations. Working with field reconnaissance units, Sarah was able to direct ground-based verification missions that confirmed her analytical findings and provided additional intelligence about actual enemy capabilities and intentions in the region. The reconnaissance teams reported that enemy forces had indeed established positions in locations that matched Sarah's geographical analysis, proving that her terrain assessment had been accurate while the original intelligence had been fundamentally flawed. The corrected intelligence picture revealed both challenges and opportunities that had not been recognized in the original operational planning. While some planned approach routes were indeed impassable, alternative paths could be used that would actually provide superior tactical advantages for advancing forces. The enemy's real positions were more defensible than originally thought, but they were also more isolated, making them vulnerable to coordinated assault tactics that could exploit geographical features to limit enemy mobility and communication. Colonel Blackwood found himself in the unusual position of owing an apology to a junior officer whose insubordination had prevented a potential military disaster. During a private meeting with Sarah, he acknowledged that her intervention had demonstrated both professional competence and personal courage that deserved recognition rather than disciplinary action. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I want you to know that your willingness to speak up when you identified critical problems shows exactly the kind of professional integrity that we need in intelligence operations. Military hierarchy exists for good reasons, but it should never prevent us from hearing information that could save lives and ensure mission success. The revised operational plan that emerged from Sarah's analysis was substantially different from the original proposal, reflecting a more accurate understanding of geographical realities and enemy capabilities in the target area. Instead of a direct assault on positions that turned out to be decoys, the new plan called for a coordinated operation that would isolate and neutralize actual enemy strongholds while avoiding terrain features that could have trapped advancing forces in vulnerable positions. Major General Wells reviewed the corrected intelligence assessments with obvious satisfaction, recognizing that the delay in operations had prevented what could have been a significant military failure. The thoroughness of this geographical analysis has given us tactical opportunities that we would never have recognized based on the original intelligence. Lieutenant Mitchell's intervention may have saved dozens of lives and prevented a mission failure that could have had strategic implications throughout this entire region of operations. As word of Sarah's contribution spread through the Strategic Operations Center, her colleagues began to view her with a respect that had been completely absent during her weeks of coffee duty. Officers who had barely acknowledged her presence during briefings now sought her input on geographical aspects of their own operational planning. Her expertise in terrain analysis became a valuable resource that enhanced the effectiveness of multiple military units operating in challenging geographical environments. The successful verification of Sarah's analysis also led to broader changes in intelligence protocols within the Strategic Operations Center. Major General Wells instituted new procedures requiring multiple verification sources for all geographical intelligence, particularly in mountainous or otherwise challenging terrain environments. The protocol specifically included requirements for cartographic specialist review of all topographical data used for operational planning, ensuring that the kind of fundamental mapping errors that Sarah had identified could not compromise future operations. Commander Thompson recommended Sarah for immediate promotion and reassignment to a senior analytical position that would make full use of her geographical expertise. The recommendation was supported by Colonel Blackwood and endorsed by Major General Wells, who recognized that Sarah's capabilities represented exactly the kind of specialized knowledge that enhanced military effectiveness and operational success. During the final briefing before the revised operation was launched, Sarah presented her geographical analysis to the full senior staff, explaining how terrain features would influence tactical movements and identifying critical waypoints where geographical conditions could affect mission timing and coordination. Her presentation was received with professional respect and serious attention, a dramatic contrast to the dismissive attitude that had characterized her early weeks at the Strategic Operations Center. The operation itself proved to be a complete success, with advancing forces following the corrected approach routes to neutralize actual enemy positions while avoiding the geographical obstacles that could have led to mission failure. Post-operation reports credited the accurate geographical intelligence with enabling tactical movements that achieved objectives with minimal casualties and maximum effectiveness, proving the value of Sarah's analytical contribution. But perhaps the most significant outcome of Sarah's intervention was the recognition that talent and expertise could emerge from unexpected sources, and that military effectiveness depended on creating environments where qualified personnel could contribute their specialized knowledge regardless of their initial assignments or perceived status within the organizational hierarchy. Her journey from coffee duty to critical intelligence analyst demonstrated that the most important contributions sometimes came from those who had the courage to speak up when they recognized problems that others had missed. The Strategic Operations Center had not only gained a valuable analyst, but had also learned important lessons about recognizing and utilizing the full range of capabilities available within military personnel. Sarah's story became an example of how individual courage and professional competence could combine to prevent military disasters and enhance operational effectiveness in ways that transformed both individual careers and organizational approaches to intelligence analysis and operational planning. 6 months after her dramatic intervention in the Strategic Operations Center, Sarah found herself standing before a military review board composed of senior officers from multiple branches of service, preparing to receive the Distinguished Service Medal for her contribution to Operation Mountain Strike and her subsequent work in geographical intelligence analysis. The ceremony was being held at the Pentagon, with representatives from intelligence communities across the military recognizing the broader implications of her analytical work and professional courage. The medal citation specifically acknowledged her willingness to challenge established intelligence assessments when she identified critical errors that could have resulted in mission failure and unnecessary casualties. But, beyond the formal recognition, Sarah's story had become a case study used in military academies and intelligence training programs to illustrate the importance of encouraging input from all qualified personnel regardless of their assigned duties or position within traditional military hierarchies. General Patricia Martinez, the commanding officer for military intelligence operations, delivered the keynote address during the ceremony, emphasizing how Sarah's intervention had led to fundamental changes in intelligence verification protocols throughout the military. Lieutenant Mitchell's courage in speaking up when she recognized critical problems demonstrates the kind of professional integrity that makes military operations effective and keeps our soldiers safe. Her example shows that expertise and dedication can emerge from any position within our organization, and that our responsibility as leaders is to create environments where such contributions can be recognized and valued. The success of the corrected Operation Mountain Strike had indeed proved the value of Sarah's geographical analysis, with the mission achieving all objectives while avoiding the potential disaster that could have resulted from the original flawed intelligence. Field commanders reported that the accurate terrain assessment had enabled tactical movements that maximized operational effectiveness while minimizing risk to advancing forces. The operation had become a model for intelligence-driven military planning that emphasized thorough geographical verification and multi-source intelligence confirmation. Sarah's promotion to captain had been accompanied by assignment to lead a new geographical analysis unit within the Strategic Operations Center, responsible for providing terrain assessment and cartographic intelligence support for operations throughout the region. Her team included both experienced analysts and recent academy graduates, creating a collaborative environment that emphasized rigorous verification procedures and encouraged input from all team members regardless of their experience level or previous assignments. The new unit had already contributed to several successful operations, with Sarah's leadership approach emphasizing the same principles that had motivated her original intervention: thorough analysis, willingness to challenge questionable intelligence, and commitment to ensuring that operational planning was based on accurate and verified information. Her team had identified and corrected geographical intelligence errors in multiple operational plans, preventing potential mission complications and enhancing the effectiveness of military operations across diverse terrain environments. Colonel Blackwood, who had initially responded to Sarah's intervention with anger and disciplinary threats, now served as one of her strongest advocates within the Strategic Operations Center. During the medal ceremony, he reflected on how the incident had changed his own approach to leadership and personnel development. Lieutenant Mitchell taught us that talent can emerge from unexpected places, and that our job as senior officers is to recognize and nurture that talent rather than simply maintaining traditional hierarchies. Her courage to speak up when she identified critical problems challenged us to become better leaders and more effective military professionals. The changes implemented at the Strategic Operations Center had indeed extended far beyond Sarah's individual case, influencing personnel policies and operational procedures throughout the military intelligence community. New guidelines required regular rotation of qualified personnel through different assignments to ensure that specialized expertise was properly utilized and that talented individuals were not relegated to support roles that failed to make use of their capabilities and training. Major General Wells had been promoted to oversee intelligence operations for an entire theater of military operations, and she credited Sarah's intervention with helping her recognize the importance of creating organizational cultures that encourage professional input from all qualified personnel. The lesson we learned from Lieutenant Mitchell's courage is that military effectiveness depends not just on following orders, but on ensuring that the orders we follow are based on the best possible intelligence and analysis. Her willingness to challenge established assessments when she identified serious problems exemplified the kind of professional responsibility that makes our military stronger and more effective. The geographical analysis techniques that Sarah had developed during her work on Operation Mountain Strike verification had been incorporated into standard intelligence protocols used throughout the military, with her methods being taught at military academies and intelligence training programs worldwide. Her approach to multi-source terrain verification had become a standard component of operational planning for missions in challenging geographical environments, helping to ensure that the kind of mapping errors she had identified could not compromise future military operations. Sarah's story had also inspired changes in military academy curricula, with new courses focusing on professional courage and the responsibility of military officers to speak up when they identified potential problems regardless of their position within organizational hierarchies. Her case was studied alongside historical examples of military leaders who had demonstrated moral courage in challenging circumstances, illustrating how individual actions could have far-reaching impacts on military effectiveness and organizational culture. The coffee duty assignment that had initially seemed like such a professional disappointment had ultimately positioned Sarah to make contributions that transformed her own career and influenced military intelligence practices on a much broader scale. Her experience demonstrated that seemingly mundane assignments could provide valuable perspectives and opportunities for those who remained engaged and observant, ready to contribute their expertise when circumstances demanded professional courage and analytical skills. During her acceptance speech at the medal ceremony, Sarah reflected on the lessons she had learned from her experience and the importance of maintaining professional standards regardless of assigned duties or perceived status within military organizations. My weeks serving coffee in the Strategic Operations Center taught me that every position within our military provides opportunities to observe, learn, and contribute to our mission effectiveness. The key is remaining professional, staying engaged with our training and expertise, and being prepared to act when our knowledge and skills can make a difference. The impact of Sarah's intervention extended beyond military circles, with her story being featured in leadership development programs and professional training courses across government and corporate organizations. Her example of speaking up when recognizing critical problems despite potential personal consequences resonated with professionals in diverse fields who faced similar challenges in balancing organizational hierarchy with professional responsibility and ethical obligations. Years later, as Sarah continued to advance through senior leadership positions within military intelligence, she maintained the same principles that had guided her original intervention: thorough analysis, commitment to accuracy, and willingness to challenge established assessments when evidence suggested potential problems. Her leadership approach emphasized creating environments where all team members felt empowered to contribute their expertise and professional insights, regardless of their position or experience level within the organization. The Strategic Operations Center had become a model for effective intelligence operations, with organizational culture and operational procedures that encouraged professional input from all qualified personnel while maintaining appropriate military discipline and chain of command structures. Sarah's legacy was not just her individual contribution to preventing military disaster, but her role in demonstrating how military organizations could become more effective by recognizing and utilizing the full range of capabilities available within their personnel. The coffee pot still hummed in the Strategic Operations Center break room, but the personnel assigned to refreshment duties now included regular opportunities for professional development and analytical training, ensuring that their specialized knowledge and capabilities were recognized and utilized appropriately. Sarah's transformation from coffee duty to distinguished military analyst had shown that talent and dedication could emerge from any assignment, and that organizational effectiveness depended on creating systems that identified and nurtured such capabilities rather than allowing them to remain hidden behind routine duties and traditional expectations. Her story remained an inspiration for military personnel facing similar challenges, proof that individual courage and professional competence could combine to create positive change that extended far beyond personal career advancement to influence military effectiveness and organizational culture in ways that enhanced mission success and saved lives in operational environments around the world.